Welcome to DMEXCO 2021. I hope you're all having a productive event. Welcome to this session, and it's called Cut Third-Party Cookies from Your Marketing Diet. And we know that the third-party cookie has fueled over 20 years of digital marketing growth and advertising growth. But now the crumbling cookie is making marketers' ability to identify, target, and serve audiences much more difficult. So today we'll talk about some of the implications of this cookie demise. We'll look at how identity resolution will look like now and into the future a little bit, and also how that will affect measurement and attribution techniques. My name is Wilson Raj, and I'm the Global Director for SAS, for Customer Intelligence. Essentially, I'm responsible for the marketing efforts for SAS's AI-powered marketing solutions. And I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts with you today. First, I would like to share the concept of data deprecation, which is another fancy word for the demise of cookies and all the effects that are associated with that. Now, clearly, data deprecation is not an overnight thing, and the forces behind it have been building for several years. What you have here is a timeline around how cookies are being affected, but also overall capture of data, particularly customer data. Now, this is by no means a comprehensive view of all the regulations that are listed, but it's just to provide you sort of a high-level context. Now, clearly, the whole impetus for this was the GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, that originated in the European Union, where GDPR set very strict standards for consumer rights, including how to protect an individual's location or IP address and other digital data collection. And it allows, it forces companies to really enable the consent of visitors for any kind of data processing or opt-in capabilities. From there, it moved on. The next phenomena was ITP, or Intelligent Tracking Prevention. And this is really more aligned to Apple's Safari and Firefox browsers. And it's their way of limiting the ability to track users across website using cookies. Now, ITP was initiated with the goal of preventing domains to be classified and to have tracking capabilities, and from monitoring users across these different sites using third-party cookies. Then, from the EU, the effects of those privacy regulations spread to the Americas, particularly starting with CCPA, or the California Consumer Privacy Act, where again it was legislation around how residents can take personal control over the information that businesses collect about them. And this is now expanded into the CPRA, or the Consumer the Consumer Privacy Rights Act, where it's creating new obligations and new thresholds for brands to be able to process sensitive personal information such as financial information or race or gender and things like that. And then we're coming to something a little bit more familiar, the deprecation of third-party cookies. In August of 2019, Google announced their intention to phase out all third-party cookies within 2 years of that announcement via a program called the Privacy Sandbox. But then, as we know, Google then just recently announced in June of 2021 that it's delaying plans to phase out cookies until 2023. So it's kind of delayed out by a year or two. And then most recently, but certainly probably not the last thing that we will see, is ATT, or Apple's App Tracking Transparency, where within the iOS 14 update, users are now asked if they want to be tracked after installing an app. So all these things are really setting aside the context for what we'll be discussing today. Now, by no means is that the only force, right? You have those restrictive privacy laws that I talked about, number one. Number two, I also mentioned in that previous slide, browser and operating system restrictions in terms of data collection. But there are also two other forces, right, in addition to that. The third element is the consumer adoption of privacy tools and privacy protecting behaviors such as ad blockers or browsing in personal mode and things of that nature. And another element to add to that is really now companies such as Amazon and Facebook are creating these walled gardens of data collection and privacy. So all this is having some net effect in terms of what we're seeing. Number one, obviously, is making identity resolution more difficult. Third-party cookies are typically what makes identity resolution possible. That means tying online behavior to a unique identity. And without that connection, marketers and advertisers will have a hard time connecting behavior across different platforms to come up with an identifiable digital identity. Secondly, there's also limiting methods of digital measurement. The loss of cookies was going to impact many forms of digital measurement. Essentially, all the data that we have that we used comes from third-party cookies or mobile ad IDs. Now, these will be severely limited in measuring marketing campaign effectiveness and moving forward. And so, to comply with privacy laws, for example, Amazon, Facebook, and Google are already limiting advertisers' ability to extract tactical level marketing performance data for campaign measurement, for models, etc. And this is really limiting insights on cross-platform or publisher or browser performance. The third outcome of what we have just discussed in a very summarized way is that the demise of third-party cookie is threatening online behavioral advertising, or OBA as it's known in the industry. This is really the practice of collecting data from particular devices or multiple devices regarding viewing behavior so that the ad server can then deliver very targeted preference-based advertising. And so now the only types of data that advertisers typically will have access to will be their own first-party cookie data and then maybe their publishers' partners' data, right, if they have access to that, or maybe other second-party marketplaces. So this method of doing online behavioral targeting will force mainly advertisers, right, to seek other ways, such as maybe segment level or contextual advertising. And of course, it completely reboots or resets the whole digital media buying ecosystem. The third-party data or third-party cookies have been sort of the foundation of the digital buying ecosystem for many years. But now the death of these third-party cookies will break that primary connection between the ad tech world to the data management platforms, or the DMPs, and then down to the demand-side platforms, or DSPs, to the ad servers, and then down to the marketers. So far there isn't really a cure-all solution, but I think there is some talk in terms of how this industry will change itself, and some of the options for managing consumer privacy and content in a more proactive way. All right, having set that context, I just want to get into the first pillar around identity resolution strategies. And clearly, we use ID resolution systems to map and connect all the complex network of signals, right, that come from not just customer behavior, but also devices, locations, Internet of Things. So in this section, I will consider some scenarios. Now, I think one way to think about this is really in terms of looking at the level of addressability, ranging from very significant or accurate to non-existent, right, at the bottom of this this pyramid. And so obviously at the top, the authenticated audiences are not individually addressable, and in the middle, this unauthenticated first and second party audiences will be potentially addressable, but that might depend on certain use cases or data available from partners. And in the bottom part, in the sort of that teal and green, that's that cohort or segment-based audiences that are based on contextual data, which are not individually addressable. That means the customer ID, you can't really say, the name and other identifying pieces. And so you can see that the top part of the pyramid is really that first-party data that's held by many brands. The middle part is where there's so much change, and that's the vacuum that's left by the third-party cookie demise. Now, here's how you can think about your primary targeting use cases. Right, one is targeting known customers at a personal level. So marketers are already using first-party authenticated data to address customers, but then to target known customers in a data-deprecated world, marketers must now unite their first-party data and permission-based customer data, which some folks call zero-party, which is that intent data, with other publisher data through a common identifier. The second big use case is retargeting unknown users. Now, the lack of third-party cookies will break those current retargeting approaches, mainly on the advertising side. But then again, I think on the marketing side, we can use some kind of a stable identifying system, such as maybe a hashed email address or other methods that I'll share a little bit more for retargeting. And then, of course, the last bit of that is really that targeting unknown net new customers. This is where, in the absence of cookies, marketers can now work or must be working with their data management providers to create, augmented, audiences and combine with their own first-party data. So what I want to share is just kind of a model to an approach that can apply to all those use cases that I shared earlier. That firstly, there isn't no single consistent approach that applies to every use case, but there's what I call a sliding scale of relationships. So if you look at this curve, at the topmost is relationship intimacy, right? This is where you're really the relationship is tight. There's intimacy. There's identity there, and then going down, to less relational. And so when you adopt this method of the sliding scale of relationship intimacy, you can look at it in terms of segment-based, right? That's used for campaigns and outbound. That's the least amount of relationship from that perspective. And then getting to a little bit more intimate, where there's more identity in terms of more targeted, more reactive, or next best action or next best offers. And then this is where you have very high intimacy in the more real-time predictive scenarios. So there are a couple of ways you can, some best practices associated with all of them. Number one is that you want to be able to establish a process to test new approaches that don't use third-party data. So before you use another targeting approach, just ask yourself some key things. Is this necessary to achieve my acquisition, retention, and growth goals? Then you identify the data and the technology and the partners that you need to execute that methodology. Also consider in that relationship scale, what's the value exchange when you're interacting with existing and new customers, right? Can you create better touch points where the customer can give you authenticated data, such as, for example, a brand, Warby Parker, that does glasses online. They use quizzes, right, to be able to capture and then use that information to personalize offerings and gather very valuable consumer intent. Another approach is to use existing customer insights as a starting point for better prospect targeting, right? This is a good retargeting strategy that starts with, firstly, the deep understanding that you have on your end, on the brand side, but then you can start building more custom target audiences by analyzing the existing customer behaviors, interests, and other characteristics, and then use those intent signals to start looking at what prospects would look like. So just a little bit more about building that strong foundation on first-party data. So for example, at SAS, we have technologies that can help create that connection. And we use first-party cookies, but what we're able to do on top of that, lay in a unique identifier that then transforms and then contextualizes all kinds of first-party data, as you can see here, from viewed media to downloads to session data, all the way down to data that comes from external marketing systems or contact history, mobile interactions, email, and so on. And what we have here is an aggregate data view of sessions, both for anonymous and identified visitors, and then using all that to be able to create identity graphs in real time as new data is captured. And so the output is a sort of an enterprise-wide or a brand-wide data model that you can use for analysis and decisioning and touch points. So I think the theme about rethinking customer identity is really about how you can assess the impact of each data dimension, and then to be able to adapt those processes to create your own precise, scaled, and compliant, right, privacy compliant identity graph. All right, so we dealt with identity resolution. The other piece of this is really around measurement. How do you adopt a holistic measurement approach given that cookies and are going away and that data deprecation is happening? I think from a marketing perspective, one of the things we see is that marketers use two very common approaches for measurement. One is called market mix modeling at the top, which is really about assessing the overall marketing plan and assigning value to various marketing activities. And this is what we call a top-down approach because it's using aggregate data. And you can answer questions such as, what percentage of my marketing budget can be used to allocate to different media channels? Or how are outside factors such as seasonality, price shifts, changes in consumer confidence altering my marketing effectiveness, and other questions like that. Now, at the core, market mix modeling is more predictive, so you can do scenario testing, what if planning, and allows marketers to explore how performance can change with these variables. Now, with the demise of the third-party cookies, one of the things that we're seeing from our market mix modeling is that there are some enhancements that are happening for this practice in terms of testing new data sources, using AI or advanced analytics to deep dive on particular channels, because when you look at it at a market mix level, there is no granularity. So I think there's more adoption of AI that's happening, and also embedding forecasts deeper in the planning process. Now, if market mix modeling is a top-down, then multi-touch attribution, again, there are other types of attribution, but I'm choosing a multi-touch as an example here, is a bottom-up. This is where we use this approach to help marketers evaluate how much credit to assign to each element of this multi-channel campaign. And because it uses individual level rather than aggregate data, attribution is typically called a bottom-up approach, as I talked about. And the types of insights you can get are maybe cross-channel touchpoint, attribution. You can do, examples of where what paid channel keywords was used along the path to purchase, or what combination of display creatives resulted in a buy or a purchase decision. Now, unlike market mix modeling, multi-touch attribution or other related attribution models are good for path to purchase insights or sequencing. It's great for looking at in-flight allocations. It correlates your creative and channel performance with conversions. And so over here, attribution here is more of a journey, right? People use sometimes single touch or last touch, and now to multi-touch, and they use from the rule-based to algorithmic. But no matter where you are on that scale, it is really important when you look at your measurement approaches is to really bring together both the top-down and the bottom-up approaches so that you're more holistic, especially now that cookies are going away. We need to have a more granular, a more comprehensive view of how you measure. And so what I'm going to do here is just show you an approach very quickly around the customer journey. And this is all about understanding and breaking down the customer journey into specific phases and assigning specific goals to them that you can now not just measure vertically, but also connect horizontally. Now, as I mentioned, alluded to earlier, measurement approaches such as attribution and mixed modeling can still leave marketers a little bit unsure of how well their strategies work. In fact, a recent report by Forrester suggested that when you have a more holistic view, top-down and bottom-up together, marketers can can improve the efficiency of the marketing budgets by 15 to 20%, and that's really significant. And so in this model, and that I'll build up, the key here is to really get crisp on what goals you want to achieve at each phase of the customer journey. So in the discover phase, it's all about customer acquisition. In the explore phase, is about limiting the customer choice so that they pick the choices that are relevant to them. Buy and use is all about conversion. Engagement is all about loyalty and advocacy and customer lifetime value. But it's not just the goal. You will also have to look at, from an algorithmic perspective, what kinds of analytic use cases you can apply there. And again, I've just correlated that for you. Hopefully you can use this as a reference. But mature marketing will basically understand the benefits of combining the top-down and bottom-up approaches. When you combine the detailed view of digital channels that are available here with a more high-level analysis that are provided by, for example, market mix modeling, then the marketer can gain a more accurate measurement that spans pretty much the customer journey. Now, as I talked about the goals, what I want to show you is how value, right, is realized in some of these things. So for example, if you use that previous construct that I shared, when we focus in on specific goals in the buy and use part of the journey, right, it's all about increasing conversion rates. And that could be done through prospect insights or improved personalization or fastest time to conversion and value through better website design, or reducing acquisition costs. That can sum up to a monetary value here. And I've given an example. That's same thing in the engagement phase, right? Post-purchase, when you have, let's say, a 1% uplift in customer value that is, again, driven by a more orchestrated service actions or improved customer profitability, it results in a combined monetary value. Same thing with the retention part, right? When you reduce defection rates through some of the actions that are shown here, that again nets up to a monetary value. So the idea here is not to look at the target as a whole, but where in the journey can you achieve both customer value, whether it's reducing churn, improving conversion and click-throughs and those kinds of things, and monetary value, right, for the brand. And so at SAS, we have actually used this method to achieve results. For in this case, I've given some banking examples here. And so again, when we talk about the demise of cookies, by using identifiers and really indexing your goals and objectives against data, against analytical techniques, you're able to really be precise, like laser sharp in terms of understanding where value can be delivered and value can be gained, and also where the handoffs are between these particular phases of the journey, from discover to explore to use to engage and then to retention and back again, right? It's a fluid process. All right, to end off, I just want to summarize some of the principles before we move into some further discussion. I think the bigger takeaways, the way I would summarize is that, hey, you have to connect the customer experience dots, right? The key is to develop. It's less about the third-party cookies, but it's more about developing appropriate relationships across all the stages of the customer life cycle that I mentioned earlier, but with specific goals, right? Marketing goals in mind, and then to understand where you can apply data analytics, right? And to bring them together. It is absolutely critical to embed transparency and privacy by design. So be transparent about how you use customer data and give them choices to opt in or opt out, right? So let's be proactive about this rather than making privacy an afterthought or even neglect it altogether. We as marketers and advertisers must think proactively about their privacy and build around it. You want to be able to test alternative targeting approaches. I think marketers still have very good privacy-safe data options that are left for prospecting. So one way is to be able to build good relationships with your publishers, second-party data, and you can now, with your first-party data, build lookalike models for audience targeting. And then you can adopt that and scale that out, right, in terms of segment-based audiences or contextual targeting methods to connect relevant content and ads to specific audiences. Next, fixate on value for the customer. I think that's also this, an extension of connecting the CX dots, right? You want to ensure that the customer gets value from the interaction. How are we helping them informationally? How are we supporting them during the service moments? How are we helping them facilitate transactions when they want to do something? Align the CX metrics to business priorities and customer journey goals, and I shared some frameworks to there. And the last part is source the data, right? This is a data game. So the data is within your organization as a whole. It could be in different parts of your organization, in marketing, in sales, in service and support, in finance. It could be with partners. And so the key thing is to source the data so that you can build that resonant identifying system. Well, that's all the time I have for this this masterclass. Please join me in the breakout session for further discussion and Q&A. I just want to hear some of your thoughts and other ideas that you may have. The link is shown here, so I will look forward to carrying this conversation in the breakout, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your attention.